All right, preview staffers, welcome to the final mini module placement training. We are covering chemistry. Obviously, I mentioned in some of the earlier modules, I don't care, which I guess you would know if you were listening to them, but I don't care what order you do them in, except for I would listen to the math placement module before I listen to the chemistry, just because chemistry builds on a lot of what the math module will cover. So just to keep that in mind. And as always, write down your questions so you can ask them in class. And yeah, let's begin. Chem placement classes. Sorry, I'm really tired. It's the end of the day on Friday, but this is good. Chem placement classes. So similar to all the other modules, we're going to talk about the classes that are important to chem placement so that we have that foundational knowledge before we move into talking about placement itself. So Chem 1020, which is Chemistry for Liberal Arts, is a state core gen and physical science. It has absolutely nothing to do with chemistry placement, but I'm bringing it up here because it's important to acknowledge that it has nothing to do with chemistry placement. Some students will ask if they can take this, if this will count as their, to meet like the prerequisites for Chem 2045, and it will not. Only Chem 1025 can do that. Chem 1025 is the 2-credit Introduction to Chemistry class that is a prerequisite for Chem 2045 if you don't meet the prereqs in other ways. So just to kind of be mindful of Chem 1020, there's just that one number that's off, but just pay attention to that. Chem 1030 is on here because the basic chemistry concepts and applications is another one. It's very infrequent that I get students that ask about that as a prerequisite, but it's good to just bring it up just in case. It used to be commonly referred to as nursing chem because it used to be a required course that nursing majors had to take, but it's not anymore, though it is encouraged. So if you have a nursing student, it might be something worth mentioning to them, but ultimately you're not going to see a lot of students who are going to register for this class, so it's okay to not be as aware of it. So that takes us to Chem 2045 in lab, and then Chem 2095 in lab. General Chemistry 1 and General Chemistry 1 for engineers. We're going to talk more about the similarities and differences between the two a little bit later in the module, but I did want to obviously bring them up here since they are such a core part of what everything about chem placement. Chem 2045 and 2095 are both Gen Chem 1s, as you can see. They each have their own lab. That's different. In the past, it used to be that Chem 2045 lab paired with both of those lectures. That is not the case. This year, for the first time, there is now a 2095 lab that students can take if they're taking Chem 2095. So that's pretty exciting. And then, of course, we've got Chem 2046 in lab, which is General Chemistry 2. So that's the next step in the sequence after Chem 2045. And you are going to have some students who are going to want to start in that class, which is why we're bringing it up. And then Chem 2047 in lab. I'm not sure if Nigel talked to you about this in placement, like placement basics in class, but we're definitely going to talk about it at the end of the module more, talking about accelerated chemistry review and the lab and what that looks like. So just as a reminder, we've got our chem placement sequencing, and I don't know why it's, okay, whatever, it's weird, that's fine. So we've got Chem 1025, which leads to Chem 2045 and Chem 2045 lab. You've got Chem 1025, which leads to Chem 2095 and Chem 2095 lab. So for both Chem 1 and Chem 1 for engineers, Chem 1025 is the prerequisite for it. And then, of course, Chem 2045 is leading to Chem 2046 and lab. So that's the next step in the sequence there. So we've got Intro to Chem, Chem 1, and then Chem 2. And then Intro to Chem is obviously only required if a student doesn't place into Chem 1. Let's talk a little bit about Chem 1025. Chem 1025 is Introduction to Chemistry, and my understanding is that the course covers about the first 6 chapters of Chem 2045 over an entire semester. So it gives students the chance to really slow down and process through the first part of Chem 1 in a much more kind of methodical fashion because you're doing it over a 15-week period, and that really helps students kind of build up their confidence and get ready for the class and coming into Chem 2045 where they have that basic knowledge already built in. Now, you are going to have some students that are Summer B admits who want to take Chem 1025 in Summer B, and that's okay. Obviously, we can't stop them from doing it, but we really would only want to encourage a student to do it if they had the math column met for Chem 2045, 2095, but not the Chem column, because you really want to make sure students have that strong math background if they're going to take it in that 6-week accelerated time. The other thing to think about is keep in mind that if the course covers the first 6 chapters, and if you take it summer B, it's going to be in 6 weeks, you're essentially doing it in the same time frame. So I don't know if it necessarily has as much value to take it over summer B. Like, I don't want to tell students not to, but just be mindful of the fact that you are taking the first 6 weeks and putting them into a 6-week term. So it's not going to change too much from a student just starting and taking it in the fall semester as Chem 2045. The courses offer both online and live, and this is in Summer B and Fall. In Summer B, the online and the live, the traditional course, are both available for students to register for throughout preview. In Fall, we do actually departmentally control the live section, and that's because we want to reserve it for students that may be the most challenged by the material, but are eligible to take the class. And that is something where only the troubleshooters, or the trouble wizards, as I like to call them, because obviously, so that's only where the trouble wizards can actually add students to the course in that situation. And what we're looking for in terms of the prerequisites or parameters to be eligible for the live section of Chem 1025 in the fall is for students to have between a 50 to 59% on ALEKS, and that is pretty much all that we're going to be looking for to give them a chance to take it live. Now, you are going to have some students that are going to be very surly about the fact that there's a live section that they don't have access to if, let's say, they have a higher score or a lower score. There's almost always seats available when the schedule adjust period opens up in August, so there's really no reason. You can definitely tell students, like, hey, keep an eye out for this, during your registration schedule adjust period. There's going to be seats still left. There always have been since I've been doing this. How many and how fast they go is completely up in the air, but there are going to be seats available, so tell students to make sure to check on that date. Now, when should students take Chem 1025 in the fall? Well, obviously, if they don't place into Chem 2045 or 2095 and they need to meet that Chem column, then of course that would be something where your default would be like, okay, well, yeah, take Intro to Chem. But we only really want students to do that if they are going to have the right math background or taking the right math course concurrently to make sure that they're prepared for that next step into Chem 1. So what this looks like is if we're looking at kind of a hypothetical fall, spring, summer schedule. Here's my first example, which shows the student taking Mac 1140 in the fall, if that's where they place, and then taking Chem 1025 and Mac 1114, so trig and Intro to Chem in spring, and then taking Chem 1 and Calc 1 in summer. Now, our alternative schedule is the student taking Mac 1140 and Chem 1025 in fall, and then Mac 1114 is the only class the student is taking in spring, and then of course summer is the same. So the big variation between those two is obviously going to be Chem 1025. In one plan it's in the spring and one plan it's in the fall. Now, looking at this, you might think like, well, it doesn't really matter, who cares when they take it. But I am actually a big proponent of option 1, so that top row, versus option 2. And there's 2 reasons why I think that's a better play for the student to pursue. The first is that the student has the option, or student will have the knowledge that he is going or she is going to gain from Mac 1140 in the fall before they take Chem 1025 in the spring. So that pre-calculus algebra knowledge could be really helpful and valuable for that student in Chem 1025 in that spring semester. So you've got a great reason right there about making sure you have the math done first, or part of the math done first. The second reason I like the first row is because it does not allow for any gap in between the student taking Chem 1025 and 2045. If you look at the bottom row, the student's taking Intro to Chem in the fall, but then has no chemistry in the spring. And that can maybe be a little jarring to then have to go back into chemistry in the summer semester. The first row negates all that or avoids it. It allows you to take Chem 1025 in spring and then move right into summer with Chem 2045 right after. Now, a lot of students are going to talk about how they're worried that they're falling behind in their major or behind in their pre-health prerequisites if they're starting in Chem 1025. And this applies to the concern about math as well. If I'm starting in Mac 1105, I'm going to be so behind. But the answer, the truth of it is that they're not going to be behind. They might be off track, and they might need to use summer to catch up, but that's okay. It's okay that they're starting where they are. This is where they place, and we'd rather have them place here, get a strong foundation, be successful in their courses, and then continue to move forward and progress into those higher level classes that they're worried about not having right away. So we really want to make sure that what we say and how we say it is very well crafted, and recognizing that how our words and our phrases matter, and that we want to make sure that we are steering students away from this concept of being behind just because they're taking intro to chemistry. It's just not true. Now, this should look pretty familiar since it is something that you covered with Nigel, and from what I understand, you guys covered it for a while, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it other than to just reemphasize that change that I know some of you were shocked about, from what I hear, and that is that the 75% on ALEKS is no longer going to allow you to meet the math prereq column. So just like as a reminder from what you learned in class, you need to have one box checked in each of the columns. You've got our chemistry column and you've got our math column. And there's a couple different boxes that are available to check in each. There needs to be a checkbox in one on each side. And you'll notice that there is no 75% on ALEKS on the right side. The math prereq column has to have some sort of class, whether it's Mac 1147 through dual enrollment or AP Calc or IB or ACE, whatever it might be. But something has to exist course-wise for the student to be able to take Chem 2045 or 2095 in the fall. So let's talk a little bit more about Chem 2045 and 2095. So the similarities are that the class covers the same material. The prereqs to take the course are the same as we just talked about. But we want to be careful that we're not talking about talking about each of these classes as the same course. So if someone's like, oh, well, what's the difference? And you're like, oh, no, they're the same. We don't want to use that word because there are differences. We'd rather use the word interchangeable. So if a student is talking about what if I decide that I don't want to do engineering anymore and I want to be a science major in liberal arts, am I still going to be able to use 2095? And the answer to that would be yes, of course. Those classes are interchangeable. We can use one or the other to meet the Gen Chem 1 requirement. So it's definitely okay to take Chem 2095 and see where that takes you. The big differences between the classes, because there are some, is that Chem 2095 uses engineering-based examples when going through the content. And then keep in mind that Chem 2095 is only available to certain majors in the College of Engineering. Not every student is going to be able to take Chem 2095. They do not have the seats available for that. They hold it for students that are specifically going to need Chem 2096 in the spring, and that way they can make sure that the enrollment is there moving from one class to the next. Registration concerns. So we just talked about how there's a couple, fewer seats in Chem 2095 than 2045. Of course, any student can take 2045, and it will meet the Gen Chem 1 requirement for engineering. And then again, Chem 2046 is offered in the fall. Chem 2096 is not. So if you have a student who's like, well, I'm engineering and I really want to take Chem 2, that's fine, but they're going to have to take Chem 2046 if they want to do it in the fall. Chem 2096 is not available at that time. So speaking of Chem 2046, we've got our columns once again, and you'll notice that they're very similar. The math column in particular looks almost identical, if not identical, to the math column that we have for Chem 2045. The big change, of course, is that in the chemistry prereq side, we can no longer use the ALEKS score as an option. We do actually have to have Chem 1, which makes sense, to be able to move on to Chem 2. But again, both columns have to have at least one check in the box in each side to be able to move forward to the class. And this is just a reminder. We talked about this in the math module, but of course it's okay to use incoming credits for placement. But here's how this is where things get super tricky with the predictions. So we talked about predictions as it relates to math and the math module. Predictions for chemistry are sneaky. You can use predictions to a point for Chem 2045 and Chem 2095. but there are limitations. So, for example, if a student is bringing in, um, let's say the student earns a 75% on ALEKS and wants to register for Chem 1. So we know that they meet the chemistry column with their 75%, but the math column is not met, right? If the student is predicting like a 3 or a 4 or something on Calc AB, and that's going to meet the math column, we will allow the student to register for Chem 1 at preview, and obviously we will monitor to make sure that they actually earn the score that they need for that calculus class, to make sure that they meet the prerequisites. So, but another example would be, I'm trying to think of something where it wouldn't work. So for that example that I just gave, so the prediction's okay for the math side of it because we have the chem side already met. Now, let's say, for example, the student didn't take ALEKS because they were like, whatever, I'm not doing it. And let's say they have, they're predicting a 4 on AP Calc and AP Chem. We would not accept predictions for the chemistry side. We could accept predictions for the math side, but not for chemistry. So we would have to wait until the student scores post to be able to verify that they have what they need to be able to register for that particular, to register for Chem 1. Now, it's okay to use predictions for Chem 2. Chem 2, similar to Calc 2, and I realize, again, it's kind of weird and confusing, and I'll do a better job of putting together like a chart for you guys, but it's okay to use predictions for Chem 2. That's fine. Either column, you can use them, and the students will be purged if they don't meet the prerequisites at the end of the summer. And again, incoming credits supersede placement, so always keep that in mind. Chem 2047. So this is a 1-semester general chemistry class. Clear and to the point, right? That is exactly what it's called. It's easy to figure out because it is 1 semester of general chemistry. So this class combines Chem 2045 and 2046 into a 1-semester accelerated review. It's designed for students who wish to move more quickly into advanced coursework, and it can be paired with Chem 2047L, which is the 2-credit combination lab. Though if you already have credit for Chem 1 and Chem 2 and you're taking it as a review, you don't have to take the lab if you don't want to. That's entirely your call. This is a great class for students that are bringing in Chem 1 and Chem 2 already through dual enrollment or AP/IB, and they're really adamant about getting into organic chem. Now, they could register for organic chem if they have the prerequisite courses done. Nothing's going to prevent them from doing it, but we strongly discourage students from taking organic chem their first semester. It's just not a good idea. Please don't let them do it, or please discourage them from doing it, I suppose. You can't let them or not let them do anything. But with this class, this is kind of a nice buffer course. It's an option to throw into the mix to get students to maybe stop thinking about organic and more about like, oh, okay, I could get some really strong foundational knowledge at UF by taking this, and this is kind of a good alternative to it. So if a student wants to do Chem 2047, there are some different prerequisites that we look for to make sure the student is eligible to take it. And by prerequisites, I mean more recommended. So it's recommended that students are predicting a high AP or IB score in chemistry and have either completed MAC 1147 before Chem 2047 or registered for Calc 1 or higher to take concurrently with Chem 2047. So there is going to be some parameters in which the student has to fall to be able to do this. AP Calculus is strongly recommended for students who take Chem 2047, and it also helps to have taken physics in high school too. Doesn't have to be AP or IB or anything, but just having a physics background can also be a little bit helpful when I think probably dealing with different components of the class.